The most profound joke in this cosmic drama we call life isn't that we're searching for something we cannot find, but that we're searching for something that was never lost. Look at your hand for a moment. Really look at it. Not as a familiar object you've seen thousands of times, but as the extraordinary phenomenon it actually is. These fingers, this palm, these intricate lines and creases, we take it completely for granted, and yet is there anything more mysterious? We stand in the midst of an unfathomable universe, breathing without effort, thinking without knowing how, existing without reason, and all the while we're convinced that understanding is somewhere else, in some other time, in some other state of consciousness. This is precisely what I find so delightful about our human predicament. We're like someone searching the house frantically for their sunglasses, unaware they've been wearing them the entire time. Now, I'm not suggesting that you already know everything there is to know. I'm pointing to something far more subtle and infinitely more fascinating. I'm suggesting that the understanding you seek, the peace, the clarity, the awakening, isn't something to be attained, but something to be recognized as already present. So let's explore together this remarkable idea that perhaps the search for understanding ends not when we reach some distant shore after years of spiritual effort, but right here, right now, in the simple recognition of what has always been the case. Because you see, the search ends here, not in some glorious future, but in this eternal present where we've always been. You see, there's something delightfully absurd about our desperate search for understanding. It's like a fish swimming frantically in search of water, or a bird anxiously seeking air. We're immersed in what we seek, and yet we don't recognize it. The very act of seeking creates the impression that what we're looking for is somewhere else, at some other time, in some other state of consciousness. But that's the grand illusion, isn't it? We chase after understanding as if it were separate from us, as if we need to become something other than what we already are. Imagine for a moment that you're sitting in a room looking for your glasses, searching high and low, becoming increasingly frustrated, only to realize that they've been on your nose the entire time. This is precisely our predicament. The Buddha was once asked, "What have you gained from meditation?" He replied, "Nothing. However, let me tell you what I have lost: anger, anxiety, depression, insecurity, fear of old age and death." You see, understanding isn't about gaining something new, it's about dropping our illusions, letting go of our misconceptions, and recognizing what has always been there. The search creates the searcher, and the searcher perpetuates the search. It's a self-sustaining loop, a dog chasing its tail, a vicious circle of seeking. And here's the kicker, the joke that the universe is playing on us. There's no one to become enlightened, and there's nothing to attain. The search ends, not with a triumphant discovery, but with the quiet recognition that we've been standing on what we've been looking for all along. What if all this desperate searching, this endless quest for understanding, is actually part of an elaborate game? A cosmic game of hide and seek that we're playing with ourselves. You see, in the Hindu tradition, they speak of something called Leela, the divine play. It's the idea that the universe isn't some grim, serious business, but rather a form of play, a game, a dance. And what makes any good game exciting? Why, it's the element of surprise, of not knowing, of hiding and seeking. So consider this curious possibility. What if you deliberately hid understanding from yourself precisely so you could have the delight of rediscovering it? What if, as the infinite consciousness, you cleverly concealed your true nature behind the mask of being a separate individual simply for the joy of the game? It's rather like when you go to the theater and watch a tragedy. You know perfectly well that no one is really dying on stage, that it's all make-believe, and yet you willingly suspend your disbelief to enjoy the drama. In the same way, perhaps we've suspended our knowledge of who we really are to enjoy this drama called life. But here's the marvelous thing about this game. It has a peculiar rule. The rule is that eventually you must remember that you're playing. You must wake up from the dream and realize that what you were searching for was never lost. It's always been right here, disguised as everything, hidden in plain sight. As I've often said, the most strongly enforced rule is the rule that we must forget that we are playing. And when we do remember, when the search ends, there's often this delightful cosmic laughter as we realize the divine joke that's been played. We've been looking everywhere for what we already are. One of the cleverest tricks of this cosmic game is how we've been convinced to perpetually postpone living. We place understanding always in the future, always out of reach, always on the horizon. When I've read enough books, when I've meditated for enough years, when I find the right teacher, when I've purified myself sufficiently, it's always tomorrow, never today, never now. This is what I call the tyranny of tomorrow. But you see, tomorrow never arrives. It's perpetually on the horizon like a mirage in the desert that recedes as you approach it. And in this endless pursuit of a future understanding, we miss the profound truth that understanding can only ever happen now. Consider, have you ever noticed that no matter what time it is, it's always now? The past exists only as memory, the future only as anticipation, but both memory and anticipation happen now. The only time you've ever been alive, the only moment you've ever experienced, is this eternal now. So when we place understanding in the future, we're effectively saying, I will understand later, but not now. But later never comes. It's a perpetual postponement, an eternal delay, a magnificent way of never having to face the truth of our immediate experience. The search ends here when we stop postponing, when we cease placing understanding on the horizon and instead look directly at what is right now. As Zen masters say, if you want to be in harmony with the Tao, just live normally and don't try too hard. The search ends not in some distant achievement, but in the simple recognition of what already is. Now let's consider something that might seem rather startling at first. Who exactly is doing all this seeking? Who is this I that's searching for understanding? When you say, I am seeking enlightenment, or I am looking for understanding, who is this I that feels separate from the understanding it seeks? This is a fascinating question because when you really look for this seeker, it becomes extraordinarily elusive. You see, we take it for granted that there's a separate self, an I isolated inside the body, looking out at the world and trying to grasp understanding. But when you actually try to find this separate self, it's like trying to bite your own teeth or see your own eyes. The Buddhist tradition has a wonderful meditation called anatta, or no self. It involves systematically looking for the self and discovering that it cannot be found. Are you your body? But which part? Are you your thoughts? But they come and go. Are you your feelings? But they change like the weather. When you really investigate, you discover something extraordinary. The seeker is itself part of what is being sought. The I that seems to be searching is not separate from the understanding it seeks. It's like a wave looking for the ocean, not realizing that it is the ocean. And this, my friends, is why the search ends here. Because the seeker is an illusion. Not that you don't exist, but that you don't exist in the way you think you do. You are not a separate self, isolated from the universe trying to attain understanding. You are the universe attempting to understand itself. You are not in the world. You are the world. As I've often said, you are something that the whole universe is doing in the same way that a wave is something that the whole ocean is doing. When this is recognized, not intellectually but experientially, the search naturally comes to an end. Not because something was found, but because the seeker was seen through. I'd like to suggest that one of our greatest hindrances to understanding is our addiction to concepts. We've become completely hypnotized by thinking, by ideas, by mental abstractions. You see, understanding in its deepest sense is not conceptual. It's not something you think, it's something you are. But we've been trained to approach everything through the filter of concepts. It's rather like studying the menu instead of eating the food. No matter how eloquently the menu describes the meal, no matter how detailed the analysis, reading about food will never satisfy your hunger. You have to eat. Similarly, reading about understanding, thinking about understanding, conceptualizing understanding, is not the same as being understanding. The concept points to the reality, but it is not the reality itself. The Chinese Zen masters were fond of saying, the finger pointing to the moon is not the moon. But we've become so fascinated with fingers, with concepts, with words, that we forget to look at what they're pointing to. Our education system, our culture, our entire way of life has convinced us that understanding comes through analysis, through dissection, through breaking things down into their component parts. And while this approach has its place, particularly in science, it's utterly inadequate for understanding the wholeness of life. As I've often pointed out, the menu is not the meal. The word water will not quench your thirst. The concept of love is not the experience of loving. And the idea of understanding is not understanding itself. The search ends here when we step out of the prison of concepts and into the direct experience of what is. Not what we think about what is, not what we believe about what is, but what is prior to all thinking, prior to all conceptualization. Perhaps one of the most counterintuitive aspects of true understanding is that it often begins with a profound admission of not knowing. This is quite contrary to our conventional approach, where we accumulate knowledge, pile fact upon fact, theory upon theory, hoping that eventually we'll arrive at understanding. In the Zen tradition, there's a wonderful concept called beginner's mind, or Shoshin. It's the mind that approaches everything with openness, eagerness, and a lack of preconceptions. As Shunryu Suzuki put it, in the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind there are few. You see, when we think we know, we stop looking. When we're filled with concepts, theories, beliefs, there's no room for fresh understanding to enter. It's like trying to fill a cup that's already full. Socrates, that marvelous old Greek, was considered the wisest man in Athens precisely because he admitted his ignorance. I know that I know nothing, he said. And in that humble admission lay his profound wisdom. There's something liberating about embracing not knowing. When we let go of our desperate need to understand everything, to control everything, to have it all figured out, there's a kind of relaxation, a kind of opening that occurs. I'm reminded of the Taoist concept of wu-wei, often translated as non-doing or effortless action. It's not about doing nothing, but about allowing things to happen naturally, without force, without struggle. Similarly, understanding arises not through force, not through effort, but through allowing, through receptivity. The search ends here when we empty our cups, when we let go of our desperate need to know and instead rest in the spaciousness of not knowing. Paradoxically, it's in this empty space, this fertile void, that true understanding has room to blossom. One of the most fascinating aspects of our search for understanding is how we've been conditioned to think in terms of opposites. Good and evil, light and dark, self and other, mind and matter, subject and object. We carve up the seamless fabric of reality into these opposing pairs and then wonder why we feel divided, fragmented, conflicted. But if you observe carefully, you'll notice something rather remarkable. These apparent opposites aren't really separate at all. They're more like the two sides of a single coin. Take up and down, for instance. They seem like opposites, yet they're completely relative and utterly dependent on each other. If there were no up, there could be no down. If there were no down, there could be no up. They're not two separate things, but two aspects of a single process. The same is true of self and other, subject and object, inside and outside. We think of them as separate, but they arise together, define each other, and can't exist apart. The ancient Chinese symbol of the Tao the yin-yang, beautifully illustrates this principle. The black and white, seemingly opposites, flowing into each other, each containing the seed of its apparent opposite. This isn't merely a philosophical concept, it's a direct insight into the nature of reality. When we begin to see that what we've been seeking and the one who seeks are not two separate things but two aspects of a single process, the search naturally comes to an end. Not because anything has been attained, but because the illusory division that initiated the search has been seen through. As I've often said, the relationship of self to other is the complete realization that loving yourself is impossible without loving everything defined as other than yourself. When this is truly understood, not conceptually but experientially, the search ends here in the recognition of our fundamental non-duality. I'd like to suggest that true understanding doesn't come through grasping, through trying to get it through effort, but rather through a certain quality of listening. By listening, I don't mean just with the ears. I mean a receptivity, an openness to the whole of life. Listening with your entire being. You see, most of us don't really listen at all. We're too busy thinking about what we're going to say next, interpreting what we hear, judging it, comparing it, categorizing it. We listen not to understand, but to reply. But there's another kind of listening that's not about accumulating information or adding to our knowledge. It's a listening that's open, receptive, without agenda, without goal. When you listen in this way, you're not trying to get anywhere, you're not trying to attain anything, you're simply present to what is. And in that presence, that attention, understanding naturally unfolds. It's rather like listening to music. When you really listen to a symphony, you're not trying to get to the end, you're not impatient for it to be over, you're simply present to each note as it arises and falls away. You're not grasping, you're not holding on, you're allowing the music to flow through you. The search ends here when we stop trying to grasp understanding and instead allow understanding to reveal itself in the open space of listening. As I've often pointed out, if you cannot trust yourself, you cannot trust your mistrust of yourself. In the same way, if you cannot listen to yourself, you cannot hear through your deafness. The search ends not in some dramatic revelation, but in the simple, quiet act of listening. One of the most peculiar aspects of our search for understanding is how we've convinced ourselves that what we're looking for is somewhere else. In another time, in another place, in another state of consciousness. We imagine that understanding is a destination to be reached after a long journey. We see it as the culmination of years of effort, discipline, practice. And while I don't wish to discount the value of discipline, there's something fundamentally misleading about this perspective. You see, the present moment is not a stepping stone to some future enlightenment. It's not a means to an end. The present is the destination. It's what we've been seeking all along. Consider this. Has there ever been a moment of your life that wasn't now? Has there ever been a time when you weren't here? No matter where you go, there you are. No matter what time it is, it's always now. The present isn't just one moment among many. It's the only moment there ever is. The past exists only as memory, the future only as anticipation, but both memory and anticipation happen now. And this is why the search ends here. Because there's nowhere else it could possibly end. There's nowhere else to go. There's nowhere else to be. As I've often said, I have realized that the past and future are real illusions, that they exist in the present, which is what there is and all there is. The search ends not with the attainment of some future state, but with the recognition that what we've been seeking has been right here all along. Have you ever noticed that when someone finally gets a joke, they laugh? There's this moment of revelation, this aha, this sudden understanding that erupts as laughter. I find this absolutely fascinating because in many ways spiritual awakening is exactly like getting a cosmic joke. In the Zen tradition, there are numerous accounts of people bursting into laughter upon awakening. Not a cynical laughter, not a mocking laughter, but the delighted laughter of someone who's just realized they've been fooled by their own game. You see, the cosmic joke is that what we've been searching for so desperately has never been lost. It's like frantically searching for your glasses when they're on top of your head, or looking everywhere for your keys while they're in your hand. When you finally realize what's happened, you can't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. The search for understanding is much the same. We look everywhere except where we actually are. We search the heavens and the earth, we read countless books, we sit in meditation for years, all the while overlooking the simple fact that what we're looking for is the looking itself. The great Zen master Rinzai was once asked, "What is the Buddha?" His response was, "The dried piece of dung right in front of your face." Rather shocking, isn't it? But his point was that we're looking for something extraordinary when the ordinary is all there is. We're looking for the sacred as if it were separate from the profane. And when this is realized, not intellectually but with one's whole being, there's often this explosion of laughter, this release of tension, this recognition of the divine comedy we've been playing. As I've often said, the meaning of life is just to be alive. It is so plain and so obvious and so simple. And yet everybody rushes around in a great panic as if it were necessary to achieve something beyond themselves. The search ends here with the laughter of recognition, with the joy of discovering that there was never anything to find because nothing was ever lost. Understanding was never somewhere else, it was always right here, looking out through your eyes. So you see, the search for understanding is rather like a dog chasing its tail. Round and round we go, faster and faster, more and more desperately, never realizing that what we're chasing is part of ourselves. The search ends not with a triumphant discovery, but with a quiet recognition of what has always been the case. It ends not with an addition, but with a subtraction, the falling away of the illusion that there was ever a separate self who needed to seek. Understanding is not something you attain, it's what you are when you stop trying to be something else. It's what remains when all the striving, all the seeking, all the becoming falls away. In the words of the Zen master, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. Nothing changes, and yet everything is different. The search ends, not with a bang, but with a quiet "Oh, I see." And perhaps most wonderfully of all, when the search ends, life begins. Not a life of desperate seeking, but a life of playful discovery, not a life of becoming, but a life of being, not a life of separation, but a life of connection. The search ends here, my friends, not because the journey is over, but because we finally recognize that there was never anywhere to go. We are what we've been seeking all along. And knowing this, truly knowing this, not as a concept but as a lived reality, we can finally stop, take a deep breath, and enjoy the magnificent journey that has no destination but itself.
Let's talk about the one subject that, strangely enough, no one really wants to talk about: death, the great unspeakable, the hush-hush reality. Our society hides it away in hospitals, disguises it with makeup in funeral parlors, and whispers about it behind closed doors. Yet here's the paradox. To understand life, truly and fully, we must come to terms with death, because the truth about death is not what you think, and it's far more liberating than terrifying. You see, most of us grow up imagining death as a kind of black curtain, a full stop, the lights going out forever. It seems like the ultimate horror, doesn't it? But let me suggest a radical idea. Death is not the end. It is transformation. It is change. Just as you were transformed at birth, and just as you transform every single moment when cells die in your body, when thoughts dissolve in your mind, so too does the larger process of death simply continue that rhythm. Death is not the opposite of life. Death is woven into life. Think of it like this. You are not just a person walking around inside a bag of skin like a ghost in a machine. That's the story we've been told, but it's not the truth. You are a process, a happening, a rhythm of the cosmos itself. Just as a wave is not separate from the ocean, you are not separate from the universe. When a wave rises and falls, do we say it has died? Of course not. It simply returns to the sea, awaiting another form, another motion, another crest. That is what you are. Death is not annihilation, but return. But here's the catch in the West. We've been taught to identify ourselves with the ego. That little I, that social mask. That voice inside your head that chatters all day long about bills, problems, ambitions, and memories. And naturally, if you believe that's all you are, then death seems like a terrifying prospect, because that ego, that narrative, certainly comes to an end. But the deeper you, the you that is not a character but the stage itself, cannot die. You are the ground of being in which the play of life unfolds. Death is simply the curtain call before the next act. Think of how we treat sleep. Each night, you let go of your entire world. You release your identity, your plans, your troubles, and you sink into a state where there is no you at all. And yet you trust it. You don't resist sleep. In fact, you welcome it, because you know that in surrendering, something within you is renewed. Death is a lot like that, only on a grander scale. If you can make peace with sleep, you can begin to make peace with death. The same mystery holds both. And in that realization, fear dissolves. But what is it that actually frightens us about death? It is not the event itself, because you have never experienced being dead. What frightens us is the idea of nothingness, of absolute void. I will be no more, we say. How terrible! But pause for a moment. What was it like before you were born? Think carefully. Do you remember the year 1720? Of course not. And yet, was that frightening? No, it was peaceful. You didn't worry about it. You didn't complain about being absent from the 18th century, so why worry about being absent in the future? This is where we trip ourselves. We assume that nothingness is a threat, when in fact, nothingness is the womb of everything. Out of the silence of space comes the music of life. Out of emptiness comes fullness. You cannot have one without the other. Imagine a piece of music with no pauses, no rests, no silence in between. It would be unbearable noise. Death is the silence that makes the song of life possible. So, when you fear nothingness, realize you are actually fearing the very thing that makes everything meaningful. Let's put this in another way. Right now, as you listen to me, you are changing. Every breath you take is an exchange with the universe. Every thought arises and passes. Every cell in your body is dying and being born. Death is not waiting for you in the future. It is happening all the time. And yet here you are, alive. So why should the final death be any different? It is not a monster lurking at the end of time, but the natural continuation of a process that has been with you all along. And here lies the secret. When you realize death is transformation, you start to live differently. You stop clinging so desperately to control, to possessions, to identities that are constantly slipping through your fingers anyway. You begin to dance with life instead of trying to nail it to the floor, for the fear of death is really the fear of letting go. But when you discover that letting go is the very motion of existence, like breathing out, then life becomes light, playful, musical. You no longer fear the end of the dance, because the point of dancing is not to arrive. So I ask you, why do we fear what is most natural? Every tree sheds its leaves. Every star eventually burns out. Every wave sinks back into the sea. And yet the universe is not diminished. It goes on creating, transforming, renewing. Death is not the end of the story, but a punctuation mark, giving rhythm to the great sentence of existence. If you can embrace that, not only will death lose its sting, but life itself will gain a depth and beauty you had never imagined. Now, let me play a little trick on you, because that is how philosophy really works. The trick is this: if you think about it carefully, you never actually encounter death, not once. What you encounter is fear, the thought of death, the story of death. But death itself, by the time it arrives, there is no one there to experience it. You see, you cannot truly imagine your own non-existence. Try it. Close your eyes and picture what it's like not to exist. It immediately turns into some kind of dark space. But of course, that's still something. This is the cosmic joke. You cannot get behind the idea of nothingness because you are always there imagining it. That's why the Buddhists say life and death are not two separate events, but part of the same flowing reality. Death is not the opposite of life. Birth and death are the bookends, but what's inside the book is the living, breathing, pulsing story of now. And when you realize this, death stops being a final stop sign and instead becomes a comma, a pause in the endless grammar of the universe. Now, let's make it practical. What does this mean for you, sitting here, perhaps scrolling on your phone late at night, worried about the future? It means that your fear of death is really a fear of missing out on life. But here's the irony. In clinging to the fear of the future, you miss the present. It's like a man so worried about losing money that he forgets to spend what he has. You are alive now, and this moment is more than enough. The way to prepare for death is not to avoid it, but to live fully now. Consider how children play. They run, they tumble, they invent imaginary worlds, and they throw themselves completely into the game. They are not concerned with how the game ends. They don't ask, when will playtime be over? They play for the sake of play. That is how life is meant to be lived. But we adults, we become serious, we become anxious, always looking at the finish line, forgetting to dance along the way. Death reminds us that the point of life is not to win, but to play, not to endure, but to enjoy. So let's talk about the great fear of the void. We think that death is a blank wall, a total void of consciousness. But what if that void is not a wall at all, but a doorway? Think of music again. Every note exists in relation to silence. The pauses give shape to the melody. Without silence, music collapses into noise. So too with death. Death is the pause that makes the symphony of life meaningful. And if you can trust that, you will find that death is not your enemy, but your companion, walking beside you, reminding you to live. You see, our culture has made a dreadful mistake. It treats death as if it were a failure. Doctors fight it, families deny it, religions sometimes threaten it. But in nature, death is not failure, it is renewal. The leaves that fall from a tree nourish the soil for new life. The stars that explode scatter the elements that form planets and bodies and minds. Even your own breath proves the pattern. You inhale, and then you must exhale. You cannot cling to the in-breath. If you did, you would suffocate. Life and death are simply the breathing of the cosmos. And when you see it this way, something miraculous happens. You stop resisting. You stop living like a clenched fist, always holding on, and instead you open like a hand. You allow things to come and go, people to arrive and depart, joys to rise and fall. Because you understand that nothing is lost, it only transforms. The caterpillar does not die when it becomes a butterfly. The seed does not vanish when it becomes a tree. You too will not simply vanish. You will transform. And if you can trust that, fear becomes curiosity. Now, don't mistake me. I am not here to sell you a story about reincarnation or pearly gates or eternal heavens. Perhaps those things are real, perhaps they are not. What matters is not clinging to an afterlife as if it were a kind of insurance policy. What matters is realizing that you are part of a process so vast, so mysterious, that even death cannot escape it. You don't need a map of the afterlife to be free from the fear of death. You need only to recognize that you were never separate from the dance in the first place. Do you remember what it was like before you were born? Was it terrifying? Of course not. It was nothing, and it was fine. And from that nothing, this incredible life burst forth. So if it happened once, why not again? If the universe has already performed the miracle of creating you, why should we doubt that it can perform another? Death may be the end of a chapter, but who's to say the book is finished? The universe has been writing itself for billions of years, and every one of us is a sentence in that vast story. And here's the beauty. Once you accept death, you stop postponing life. You stop saying, one day I will travel, one day I will love, one day I will be free. Because you understand that life is not in the future, it is only here, only now. Death teaches urgency, not panic, but presence. It says, stop clinging to the past. Stop worrying about the future because you never had them anyway. All you ever have is this breath, this moment, this eternal now. And once you live in that, death loses its teeth. Let us imagine for a moment that you are standing at the edge of a great ocean. The waves roll in and roll out endlessly, without beginning, without end. Now suppose one of those waves said, "Oh no, what will happen to me when I fall back into the sea?" We would laugh, because of course the wave is the sea. And yet that is how most of us live, clinging desperately to the idea that our little crest, our temporary form, must somehow continue forever. But the wave was never lost. It was always the ocean playing. And this is the true liberation. When you understand you are not the little wave, but the ocean itself, then death ceases to frighten you. Because what dies is only the form, the name, the story. What you really are, the vastness behind the mask, cannot die. That is why mystics throughout the ages have spoken of death as a kind of homecoming, not annihilation, but a return, not punishment, but transformation. Just as sleep is the return of consciousness into the silence of night, death is the return of life into the silence of eternity. Now, let me bring this down from the clouds into the streets of everyday life. When you live in constant fear of death, you become tight, anxious, always trying to control every outcome. You hold so tightly to your possessions, your status, your opinions, as if any of them could shield you from impermanence. But when you loosen that grip, when you understand that all things are flowing, you begin to relax. You enjoy things while they last without trying to freeze them. You let people be who they are because you know they too will change. This is freedom. Think of autumn leaves. They fall and we do not mourn them because we know they will become the soil for next spring's blossoms. In the same way, when you accept death, you discover gratitude. Gratitude for every fleeting moment, gratitude for every sunrise, every laugh, every heartbeat. Gratitude because you know it is all temporary, and that is what makes it precious. If life were endless, it would be dull, meaningless. It is the fact of death that sharpens the taste of life, the way a little salt brings out the flavor in food. You might ask, "But Alan, what about the pain of losing loved ones?" Ah, yes, that is the hardest part. The grief of death is not about your own ending, but about separation from those you love. But even here, the truth remains, nothing is lost. Think of your grandmother or a dear friend who has passed away. They are not gone, not really. Their influence, their voice, their humor, the love they gave you, it lives in you. You are the continuation of everyone who ever touched your life. Death does not erase them. It weaves them deeper into you. And here we encounter another paradox. The more deeply you love, the more grief you will feel when death comes. But grief is not a problem to be solved. It is the price of love. It is the proof that life mattered, that connection was real. So, rather than run from grief, we bow to it, we allow it, because it too is part of the dance. Without endings, there would be no beginnings. Without grief, there would be no joy. They are two sides of one coin, turning endlessly in the hands of existence. And I must tell you, one of the greatest taboos in our culture is not only death itself, but the joy of death. That may sound scandalous. But think of it. Every culture that has truly understood life has also celebrated death. In Mexico, the Day of the Dead is filled with music, costumes, and laughter. In Tibet, the Book of the Dead is not a horror story, but a guidebook for liberation. Death has always been both solemn and joyful. Only our modern world, in its obsession with control and denial, has made death into a sterile tragedy. But death, if you really look at it, is the great adventure. It is the one thing guaranteed to happen to you that remains completely unknown. And yet you have faced the unknown many times before. Birth was the unknown. Falling in love was the unknown. Every leap into change has been a death of the old self and the birth of the new. Why should the final leap be any different? Death is the climax of change, the final transformation, the last and greatest mystery. To fear, it is to fear the very essence of life itself. So, let me ask you directly, what would you do if you were no longer afraid of death? How would you live? Would you take more risks? Would you speak your truth more boldly? would you waste less time on trivial worries? You see, death is not only the end, it is also the teacher. It whispers, do not delay, do not wait for permission. This is your moment. To meditate on death is not to be morbid, but to wake up. It is the ultimate alarm clock ringing inside your soul. And here is the paradox, the grand irony. The more you accept death, the more alive you become. Because then every sunset is a miracle, every hug is a blessing, every laugh is holy. You no longer sleepwalk through life, waiting for some future salvation. You see the sacred in the ordinary, you taste the eternal in the temporary. And in that awakening, you realize the truth that no one told you. Death is not your enemy. Death is your companion. It has been walking beside you from the moment you were born, not to terrify you, but to remind you to live. Now, let us take this all the way home. When you see death not as a grim reaper waiting to rob you, but as part of the very fabric of existence, you begin to notice something curious. Life and death are not enemies locked in battle. They are partners in a dance. You cannot have one without the other, just as you cannot have up without down, sound without silence, or front without back. This is what Eastern wisdom has been saying for centuries. Opposites are not in conflict, they complete each other. Death is what gives life its shape. But in the West, we often imagine that life is a war and death is the enemy. Doctors fight it, soldiers resist it, families pray against it. And yet, no matter how hard we resist, death wins. Not because it is cruel, but because it is inevitable. And here's the twist. Inevitability is not the same as tragedy. The sun setting each evening is inevitable. But is it tragic? No. It is beautiful. It paints the sky with fire. So too with death. It may be inevitable, but it is also beautiful, if you have the eyes to see. Let me ask you this. If you were offered eternal life, would you take it? At first you might say yes, but think again. Imagine a movie that never ends, a song that plays forever, a meal that never finishes. At some point, it would become unbearable. What makes a story meaningful is its ending. What makes a song sweet is that it fades. Death, you see, is not the destruction of life, but the completion of it. It is the punctuation at the end of the sentence. Without it, life would lose its flavor, its urgency, its meaning. So perhaps the real tragedy is not that we die, but that we fail to live while we are alive. We spend our days in fear, in distraction, in endless busyness, as if life were a rehearsal for something else. But there is nothing else. This is it. Right here, right now. And death is the great reminder of that. Death taps you on the shoulder and says, wake up, pay attention, stop postponing, live. And if you can hear that voice, if you can let death be your teacher instead of your terror, your entire life will be transformed. In fact, this is why many spiritual traditions teach the practice of dying before you die. Not in a physical sense, of course, but in letting go of the ego, the illusions, the clinging. To die before you die is to realize you were never just this temporary form. You are the process, the dance, the universe itself. And when you truly see that, then when the final moment comes, you will not resist it. You will greet it as an old friend, as the moment when the drop falls back into the ocean and remembers that it always was the ocean. Let us not forget humor either. Death is often far too serious a subject, wrapped in black clothes and solemn faces, but perhaps the universe has a sense of humor about it. After all, think of how strange it is that we come from nothing, appear for a brief flicker, worry endlessly, and then return to nothing only for the whole show to begin again in another form. If that isn't a cosmic joke, I don't know what is. To laugh at death is not to disrespect it, but to join in the humor of existence itself. And so, the truth about death that no one told you is not grim, not frightening, but liberating. Death is not the opposite of life, but the other side of it. Death is not annihilation, but transformation. Death is not your enemy, but your greatest teacher. And when you accept it, you stop clinging to the impossible dream of permanence, and you begin to live with lightness, with courage, with joy. You begin to play, to dance, to sing, to love with all your heart, because you know every note, every step, every kiss is fleeting and therefore infinitely precious. So, let me leave you with this meditation. Picture your life as a candle. One day, inevitably, the flame will go out. But what matters is not how long the candle burns, but how brightly it shines while it is lit. Shine brightly, love fully, laugh deeply. And when the flame goes out, it does not vanish into nothing. It merges back into the fire that lit it in the first place, the fire of the cosmos, the eternal energy that takes 1,000,000 forms. You are that fire. You always were. Death simply returns you to yourself. So, my friends, let us not whisper about death as if it were a secret shame. Let us not treat it as an enemy to defeat. Let us meet it with curiosity, with gratitude, even with joy. Because the truth about death is the truth about life. Both are one, inseparable, like two sides of a coin. And when you know that, you are free. Free to live, free to love, free to be. Death loses its sting, and life gains its song. That is the wisdom hidden in plain sight, waiting for those brave enough to look. And so, to conclude, the truth about death that no one told you is simple. It is not the end. It is transformation. It is the great rhythm of existence, the silence that makes the music possible, the night that makes the morning beautiful, the pause that makes the dance complete. Do not fear it. Do not deny it. Learn from it. Let it remind you to live this life here and now, with courage, with laughter, with love. For when you embrace death, you embrace life itself, and you discover at last that you will never separate from eternity.
Let us be honest for a moment, painfully honest. By all outward appearances, this thing we call life is merely a flicker, a brief spark of light between two endless nights, and not even a peaceful day between them. For the more we allow ourselves to feel pleasure, the more open we are to pain. The more light we draw in, the darker the shadow that follows. And it is always there just behind the laughter, the triumph, the so-called joy. We have tried, through centuries of effort and imagination, to make sense of this, to give meaning to a flickering existence that ends in silence. And the only way we seem able to do this is by insisting there must be something more, some deeper layer, some grander plan behind the outward spectacle. Heaven, salvation, rebirth, destiny, call it what you will. We crave security not merely in this life, but beyond it. Because to accept the rawness of what is that life, comes and goes, without fixed reason, without guarantee, is a terrifying prospect. Now, I may not be forgiven for introducing such grave matters with a childish image, but the whole affair reminds me of something I tried to do when I was a boy. I wanted to send someone a parcel of water, not a bottle. I wished to tie up the water itself with paper and string. And of course, every time I tried, the result was a soggy mess. The water escaped, just as life slips through our fingers when we try to contain it. You see, human beings are rather brilliant at tying packages. We have built systems of belief, politics, morality, and metaphysics, carefully wrapped bundles of meaning, each attempting to hold the unholdable, name the unnameable. But no matter how clever the method, the package falls apart. The water bursts free. And the more our knowledge has grown, the more history we accumulate, the more facts we collect, the more aware we become, the more fragile these packages appear. They cannot contain the complexity. They cannot hold the flow. And so the modern mind finds itself in a peculiar state, flooded with information, but starving for meaning. We live in an age of extraordinary insecurity, not because the world is more dangerous than before, but because the anchors we use to cling to have unraveled. Traditions, religions, social roles, eternal truths, all questioned, all cast into doubt. Some celebrate this as a liberation. Others, understandably, find it disorienting, even terrifying. And most people live somewhere between the two, briefly exhilarated by freedom, then quietly overtaken by dread. For if nothing is fixed, if life is truly just change, just flow, just this present, then what becomes of hope? Hope, you see, is always aimed at the future. A better job, a longer life, a heaven after death.
But if the future is as fluid as water, if there is no promised land awaiting us, what then? It seems, quite frankly, hopeless. And yet, we still chase. We chase happiness not in the present, but in the promise of what is to come. We say, just around the corner, then I'll be fulfilled. After this crisis passes, once I've found my purpose, when I retire, when I die. But the future, like the water in my childhood parcel, never quite arrives. And even when it seems to when the long-awaited day finally comes, we find it cannot be enjoyed unless it too carries a promise of another future beyond it. It's a cruel trick of the mind. To seek happiness in the future is to forever chase a mirage, a will-o'-the-wisp that disappears the moment you reach for it. And then in the end you vanish too. But understand this insecurity, this uncertainty, is not new. There has never been a time in human history where security was more than temporary, more than an illusion. Even in what we call the good old days, life was fragile. Death, disease, and disaster did not wait politely at the margins. What made life bearable then, however, was not certainty, but belief. Belief in God, in the soul, in eternal justice, things untouched by the calamities of the world. And while these beliefs may not have made life less precarious, they gave it shape. They gave it meaning. But now today, such convictions are harder to find. Even in churches and temples, even among the devout, there lingers doubt. Science has not only replaced religion in authority, it has stripped from us the comfort of myth. The scientist does not pretend to know what cannot be known, and in doing so reveals the vast, indifferent mystery of the cosmos. This honesty, admirable though it is, leaves the human heart famished. Because while the mind is satisfied with logic, the soul yearns for more. It wants purpose, direction, assurance that all of this matters. And when those assurances collapse, we look elsewhere. Political movements become our myths, social crusades become our meaning. We join collective efforts, not always because they are just, but because they give us a sense of being part of something larger, a sense that we are not alone in the dark. But you can feel it, can't you? The trembling underneath. For these are not certainties, but shouts in the night. And the louder we shout, the more fragile we reveal ourselves to be. So what happens to a mind, to a being, that can no longer believe? Not in fairy tales, but in any foundation at all. What becomes of the heart when all the old myths crumble and the new ones ring hollow? It begins to grasp. We turn inward, hoping to find permanence in ourselves, in our identities, our careers, our knowledge. We say, at least I am this, or at least I know that. But the truth, if you look just a little too long in the mirror, is that you are changing constantly, quietly, without your permission. The face, the thoughts, the tastes, the hopes, none of them stay. And so you clutch, you plan, you try to prepare, to fortify. You attempt, as all modern people do, to organize your life into a blueprint of safety. You build routines, set goals, make lists, meditate, track your calories, forecast your income, visualize success. You try, in every imaginable way, to manage the future. But no matter how precise the effort, the outcome never feels secure. Something always slips out of view. Some variable, some person, some emotion, some event ruins the equation, and you are back where you started, uncertain. And then here lies the rub. You blame yourself. You say, if only I had tried harder, planned better, prayed deeper, been more focused. But the real problem is not your failure. The problem is the game itself, because you are chasing control in a world that is uncontrollable. You are searching for security in a realm that is defined by change. It is, as we said before, like trying to tie up water in a paper parcel. You get wet, you fail, you try again. And in that trying, in that reaching for a future that never arrives, you create your own suffering. Here is the paradox. The desire for security is the very thing that makes you feel insecure. The more you want to feel safe, the more you notice how unsafe things really are. The more tightly you grip the rope,
the more your hands burn. In the act of resisting uncertainty, you become obsessed with it. And what you resist, you magnify. Fear breeds fear. Worry breeds more worry. To want safety, absolute permanent safety, is to fight against the very nature of existence. Because the universe, you see, is not fixed. It dances, it flows. It erupts and collapses, sings and silences, all in rhythm without asking your permission. And so, when you demand that it pause for your comfort, you suffer. Because life will not hold still. It will not meet you in the future. It is already here. The mistake is in thinking you can stand apart from it, manage it, direct it from some imagined place of separateness. But you are not outside of life. You are not the observer looking in. You are in it. You are it. Just as a wave is not something separate from the ocean. It is the ocean momentarily expressing itself as a wave, so you are not separate from the universe, but the universe momentarily expressing itself as you. And the moment you see this, the need for security begins to dissolve. Because what could be more secure than this very moment, the only one that ever truly exists? So then, what is one to do? If life offers no final foothold, if beliefs fade, if plans crumble, if even the self turns to smoke under scrutiny, where does one stand? And the answer, though simple, is not easy. You stop standing. You stop seeking a ground. And you fall freely, openly, into the present. Not because the present moment is safe, but because it's the only thing that's real. You see, we have confused the idea of freedom with the power to control. We think we are free when we have mastery over the future, when we've eliminated risk, when the path is clear and marked. But that isn't freedom at all. That is fear wearing the mask of progress. Real freedom is far more wild. It's the surrender to the rhythm of life, to change, to death, to rebirth, not as things to overcome, but as the very texture of existence. Because in truth, you were never in control. There was never a separate you behind the eyes, managing the world like a ship from its helm. There is only awareness, witnessing, dancing, being. But as long as you try to cling to certainty, to permanence, to me, you will suffer. You suffer not because life is cruel, but because you want it to be something it is not. You want it to be solid, predictable, safe, and life, thank God, is none of those things. The very beauty of it all is in its impermanence. A cherry blossom is not less beautiful because it falls. The sun is no less radiant because it sets. So why do you imagine you must remain? Why do you fight to freeze the flowing water? The wisdom of insecurity is not some clever philosophy. It is a way of seeing, a return. It is the recognition that the moment you stop trying to secure your life is the moment it becomes alive. That in letting go of your need for answers, you begin to feel the mystery again. You were never meant to have it all figured out. The point was never to capture life, but to feel it. To live it as music, not as math. As dance, not direction. So, when you stop resisting change, when you no longer brace against the current, you find that the river was carrying you all along. You are not lost. You are not late. You are simply here. And here is enough. Now, perhaps the greatest illusion of all the root from which all this anxiety springs is the idea that you are separate from life, that you are a skin-encapsulated ego, tossed into a world not of your choosing, doing your best to survive, and hopefully to succeed. But who told you that? Where did you get this idea that there is a little you inside your head pulling the levers and thinking the thoughts, directing the action like some spiritual CEO? You were taught it. You were told from the very beginning, you are you, and everything else is other. And so you've spent your life defending that boundary. But consider this, can there be a front without a back? Can you have a coin with only one side? You are not a stranger here. You are the universe, expressing itself briefly as a person. Just as a wave is not separate from the sea, you are not separate from the whole. The air you breathe, the thoughts you think, the heartbeat in your chest, these are not possessions, they are processes. Movements, the world happening through you. You don't beat your heart, you don't grow your hair, and you certainly don't choose your thoughts. They arise as clouds form and drift and dissolve. So when you let go of the idea of being someone in charge, what's left is not chaos but peace. The fear of death begins to dissolve because, you see, there was never a fixed you to lose in the first place. So then how does one live, knowing that all things pass? You live as the tree lives, bending in the wind, rooted not in certainty, but in presence. You do not cling to the leaves, for you know they must fall. You do not beg the river to stop flowing, for its movement is its music. To love life truly is to love its change. To love without owning, to act without anxiety, to hold without grasping. You eat the fruit of the moment, you taste it fully, but you do not try to preserve the peel or frame the seed. This is not a call to apathy or passivity. No, quite the opposite. When you are no longer driven by fear, you begin to live with gentleness and with great power. You laugh more. You cry more easily. You touch the world more softly because you are no longer trying to conquer it. You are it. And so, to live wisely is to live freely. To live freely is to live without clinging. And to live without clinging is to be at last at peace.
You know, there's something rather peculiar about death that I've been contemplating for quite some time now. Something that seems so obvious once you see it, yet remains hidden behind our cultural programming and personal fears. And it's simply this: you will never, not ever, experience your own death. Now, before you dismiss this as some clever wordplay or philosophical trick, allow me to invite you into a different way of seeing. Because this insight, once truly grasped, doesn't merely change how you think about death, it transforms how you experience being alive right now. What we call death appears to be the most certain fact of existence, doesn't it? The one thing we can be absolutely sure of. Yet I want to suggest that what we fear most about death is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of consciousness itself. You see, most of us imagine death as if we will somehow be present at our own funeral. As if we'll be lying in the coffin with our eyes closed, experiencing the darkness, the confinement, the eternal separation from everything we love. But that's utterly fascinating, isn't it? We imagine death as an experience of nothing. But an experience of nothing is still an experience, which means consciousness is still there. Let me approach this another way. Can you remember what it was like before you were born? Do you experience it as an infinite darkness, an eternal void that somehow preceded your existence? Of course not. There simply isn't anything there to remember. There's no experience of non-existence because experience requires existence. And herein lies the great cosmic joke about death. We spend our lives dreading something that, from the perspective of our own consciousness, cannot possibly happen. The light doesn't go out for the light. The screen doesn't disappear for the images upon it. Think of it this way: you've gone to sleep countless times, haven't you? And in dreamless sleep, there's no experience of time passing. One moment you're falling asleep and the next you're waking up. The 8 hours in between simply vanish. They aren't experienced as darkness or emptiness. They aren't experienced at all. Death, I propose, is similar, but with one crucial difference. There's no you that wakes up afterward to reflect back on the gap. But from the perspective of your awareness, that makes no difference whatsoever. There's still no experience of death itself. Our fear, you see, comes from imagining death while still alive. It's a bit like trying to imagine what it's like to have your head cut off while still feeling the neck. It's a logical impossibility, a paradox created by thought itself. So what dies? Certainly this body will dissolve back into the elements from which it came. But
The awareness that you fundamentally are, that which knows experience, has no beginning or end because it exists only in the eternal now. And that brings us to our next contemplation. You know we're all under the strangest hypnosis. We are convinced that time flows from past to future and that we're moving along with it like little boats being carried by a great river. But is that really the case? Let's look more closely. When exactly do you exist? Well, you might say, I exist now, of course. And you'd be absolutely right. But have you ever experienced any moment except now? Has anyone in the entire history of human consciousness ever experienced anything except the present moment? The past, you see, doesn't exist except as memory, which happens now. The future doesn't exist except as anticipation, which also happens now. Your birth, a story told now. Your death, a concept imagined now. All we ever have, all we ever are, is this immediate experience. So when people speak of death as the end of consciousness, I find that rather amusing. Because consciousness only ever happens now, and now has no beginning or end. It's not in time, it's what contains time. Think of watching a sunset. The sun appears to be moving, descending below the horizon. But we know it's actually the earth that's turning. In the same way, it appears that we are moving through time, approaching death with each passing moment. But what if it's time that's moving through us, while awareness itself remains eternally present? You see, death can only exist as a concept in the mind, never as a lived reality. By the time death arrives, you're not there to meet it. And as long as you're there, death hasn't arrived. The two never coincide in direct experience. This is why I say that from the standpoint of consciousness, you will never experience your own death. Not because you'll somehow survive bodily death, though that's another conversation entirely, but because the aware presence that you fundamentally are exists only in the timeless now. And if you pay very close attention, you might notice something rather extraordinary. This now isn't just a fleeting moment that's constantly being replaced by the next now. It's always the same now. The content changes, yes, thoughts, sensations, perceptions come and go, but the nowness itself, the quality of presence, remains unchanged. This is what the mystics mean when they speak of eternity. Not endless time, but the transcendence of time altogether. And it's available to you directly, right here, right now, as the simple fact of being aware. This awareness which you already are was never born and will never die. It is the still point around which the entire cosmos turns. Now, let's dive into something rather fascinating about this human predicament. If what I've been suggesting is true, that awareness itself is timeless and never experiences its own absence, then why are we so terrified of death? What exactly is it that fears annihilation so desperately? It's what I call the ego, this sensation of being a separate self, a lonely little me imprisoned inside a bag of skin, peering out at a world that's fundamentally other. This ego, you see, is not your fundamental nature. It's more like a character in a play that awareness is performing. The ego defines itself through memory and anticipation. It's the story of me, where I came from, what I've done, where I'm going. And because this story extends in time, the ego naturally fears the end of time. Because without time, what becomes of its precious storyline? You might notice, if you look very carefully, that this ego is never actually found in present experience. It's always just around the corner. Try to pin it down, and it vanishes like a mirage. Ask yourself, who am I? And watch how thought rushes in with labels and descriptions, memories, roles, qualities, but never the actual I itself. This is why death terrifies us. The ego senses, correctly, that it won't survive death. The story ends. The character dissolves. But here's the cosmic joke: the ego doesn't exist in the way it thinks it does even now. It's a process, not an entity. A verb, not a noun. A song, not a singer. What you truly are is not this temporary pattern called the ego, but the awareness within which all patterns arise and dissolve. And this awareness, vast, boundless, clear, is untouched by birth and death. It's the space in which all of life's drama unfolds. So the ego's fear of death is based on a case of mistaken identity. It's as if the actor has become so identified with the role that they've forgotten their acting. They dread the final curtain because they believe the play is reality. But what if death is not the end of the show, but simply the moment when you remember that you're not just the character, but the whole theater? Not just the wave, but the entire ocean? Not just a person experiencing life, but life itself experiencing being a person? The ego cannot conceive of this because it thinks exclusively in terms of survival or annihilation. But what I'm pointing to transcends both. It's not that you survive death or that you don't survive death. It's that what you fundamentally are was never in time to begin with, and so was never subject to birth or death at all. You know, this whole business of being a separate individual is quite peculiar when you really look at it. Where exactly do you end and the rest of the universe begin? We think it's obvious, the boundary of my skin marks where I stop and everything else starts. But is that really so? Consider your breathing. Is the air in your lungs you or not? You. What about when you exhale it? Does it suddenly become not you? And what about the air you're about to inhale in your next breath? Is it already a little bit you, since your very existence depends on it? Or take your food. The apple you ate yesterday has now become your body. Where exactly did it transform from not you to you? In your mouth? Your stomach? Your bloodstream? The truth is, what we call an individual is more like a whirlpool in a stream. The water is constantly flowing through it, yet the pattern maintains a certain integrity. But the whirlpool is not separate from the stream, it is a pattern that the stream is doing. In the same way, you are not separate from the universe, you are a pattern that the universe is doing. A very complex and beautiful pattern, to be sure, but still a process within a larger process. So, when we contemplate death, we're usually thinking, oh dear, this separate me is going to disappear. But that separate me is already an illusion. It's a useful fiction for practical purposes, rather like the equator, a line that helps us navigate but doesn't actually exist in physical reality. What dies is not a separate entity, but a particular pattern, a unique dance that the cosmos has been performing for a while. The dancer disappears, but the dancing continues. The wave subsides, but the ocean remains. You see, personal extinction is impossible because the person was never really there to begin with, at least not in the way we imagine. What we call I is not a thing but an activity, a process of the whole universe. And the universe doesn't die when one of its patterns transforms. I'm reminded of a wonderful Zen saying, before enlightenment, mountains are mountains and rivers are rivers. During enlightenment, mountains are no longer mountains and rivers are no longer rivers. After enlightenment, mountains are again mountains and rivers again rivers. Before we question our separate existence, we take it for granted. As we inquire more deeply, we see that this separation is illusory. And finally, we return to the ordinary world, but now we see it as a unified field of being, playing at being many. So death is not the end of you, it's the end of a particular way that the universe has been expressing itself. And since you are not separate from the universe, but rather the universe itself in human form, what is there to fear? The play of existence continues, taking on new forms, exploring new possibilities forever and ever. Now let's explore one of my favorite metaphors for understanding our relationship to eternity. Imagine the ocean, vast, deep, powerful, and on its surface countless waves rise and fall. Each wave has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Each has a unique shape and character. Some are large, some small, some turbulent, some gentle. If you were to identify with a particular wave, you might feel very separate and vulnerable. You would see other waves as separate entities. You would see your own beginning in time and anticipate your ending. You would feel the temporary nature of your existence and perhaps cling desperately to your particular form. But what are you really? Are you just the wave, or are you also the water that forms the wave? And if you are the water, then what happens to you when the wave subsides? Do you die, or do you simply return to the formless depths from which you arose? The wave is a form that the ocean temporarily takes. In the same way, you are a form that consciousness temporarily takes. The individual consciousness that you call me is like a wave on the ocean of cosmic consciousness. What we fear is the dissolution of form, but the formless awareness that gives rise to all forms is never born and never dies. It's the eternal ground of being, the source and substance of all that appears. Think of it this way: the wave doesn't contain the ocean contains the wave. Similarly, you don't contain consciousness, consciousness contains you. You are not in the world is in you, in awareness, in the field of knowing that you fundamentally are. When the body dies, a particular expression of consciousness transforms. But consciousness itself, that which knows experience, remains untouched, just as the ocean remains when a wave subsides. Now, I'm not suggesting that you, as Jane or John, with all your memories and personality traits, will survive death intact. That's not the point. The point is that what you most essentially are was never contained in a particular human form to begin with. You are not a wave pretending to be the ocean. You are the ocean pretending for a while to be a wave. And the game of pretending eventually comes to an end. But the player doesn't disappear, only the role does. So when someone asks, what happens after death? I'm inclined to smile and say, what happened before birth? You return to the source from which you came, not as an individual, but as the boundless awareness that temporarily expressed itself as an individual. And that's not something to fear, it's something to celebrate. It's the recognition that you are far vaster, far more magnificent than this temporary human form could ever contain. There's a delightful Hindu idea that I've always found rather illuminating. They say that the fundamental nature of the universe is Lila, divine play, or cosmic game. And what sort of game is the cosmos playing? Hide and seek. The Upanishads tell us that which is the finest essence this whole world has, that has its soul, that is reality, that is the self, that art thou. In Sanskrit, tattvamasi, you are that. The ultimate reality, playing at being all these separate things. But for the game to be interesting, the one must forget that it is one. It must pretend with great conviction to be many, just as an actor must temporarily forget their real identity to play a role convincingly, or a dreamer must forget their dreaming to be fully immersed in the dream. So here we are, the one playing at being many, having divided itself into countless, seemingly separate selves. And death, in this grand scheme, is simply the moment when a particular game of hide and seek comes to its conclusion. The mask comes off. The actor steps out of character. The dream dissolves. And what's revealed? Only what was always there, the true identity that was hiding all along. Think of a child playing hide and seek. There's such joy in being hidden, in the delicious tension of waiting to be found. But there's also joy in being found, in the relief of revelation, in the laughter of recognition. It was you all along. Death may be just such a moment of recognition, not an end but a revelation, not a loss but a homecoming, not darkness descending but a veil lifting. You see, consciousness loves to play this game of limitation and separation. It loves to narrow its infinite scope into a single perspective, to experience itself as this or that particular being. There's an exquisite delight in it, just as there's delight in becoming absorbed in a novel or a film, temporarily forgetting our wider reality. But every game must eventually end. Every novel reaches its final page. Every film has its closing scene. Not because something has gone wrong, but because that's the nature of a game, a story, an experience. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So what happens when the game of being you comes to its conclusion? Does consciousness disappear? No more than an author disappears when they finish writing a book. The author simply stops pretending to be the characters. They return to their broader identity, perhaps to write another book, to tell another story, to play another game. I'm not saying that you, with your particular memories and quirks, will be reincarnated exactly as you are now. That would be missing the point entirely. I'm saying that what you truly are, the aware space in which all experience happens, is what incarnates as everything. It's incarnating as the entire cosmos right now. So death is not the opposite of life. It's the backdrop against which the dance of life becomes meaningful. It's the silence between notes that makes music possible. It's the empty space that gives form to a vase. Without death, life would have no shape, no drama, no poignancy, no beauty. And in this cosmic game of hide and seek, you are both the hider and the seeker, both the one who is lost and the one who is found, both the one who forgets and the one who remembers, both the wave that rises and falls and the ocean that remains. I've been talking about eternity, but I want to be very clear about what I mean by that word. Most people think of eternity as endless time, as if you'd live forever and ever in some sort of sequence. But that's not eternity at all, it's just very, very long time. And it would be utterly boring. No, eternity isn't endless time, it's the transcendence of time altogether. It's the recognition that time is a construction of thought, a convenient fiction that helps us navigate our practical affairs. You see, we divide time into past, present, and future. But where exactly is the past? Can you show it to me? Can you experience it directly? Of course not. The past exists only as memory, and memory happens now. Similarly, the future exists only as anticipation, and anticipation happens now. So there is only now. There has only ever been now. There will only ever be now. And now isn't in time, it's what contains time. This is why I say you will never experience your own death. Because death is conceived as a future event, and the future is never actually experienced. By the time the future arrives, it's already the present. And in the present, you're always alive, otherwise you wouldn't be experiencing anything at all. The Buddha called this amata, the deathless. Not because the body doesn't die, but because what you truly are exists only in the timeless now, which is never born and never dies. Think of time as a movie being projected on a screen. The screen itself doesn't move or change. It's not affected by the drama playing out upon it. In the same way, awareness, what you fundamentally are, doesn't move through time. Time moves through awareness. This is not merely a philosophical notion, it's something you can verify in your own direct experience. Right now, as you're listening to me, notice the aware space in which these words are appearing. Notice the awareness that knows the sensations in your body, the sounds in your environment, the thoughts in your mind. This awareness is timeless. It doesn't come and go. It doesn't age or deteriorate. It's ever present, ever fresh, ever new. It's what the mystics call the eternal now. And here's something quite extraordinary. This now that you're experiencing is the very same now that I experienced when I was alive. It's the same now that the Buddha experienced 500 years ago. It's the same now that will be experienced by those who come long after we're gone. There's only one now, and we all share it. It's the eternal present in which the entire cosmic drama unfolds. And it's what you are, beneath all your temporary identifications with body, mind, and personality. So when the body dies, a particular perspective on the eternal now comes to an end. But the now itself, the awareness that you fundamentally are, remains untouched, just as the screen remains when the movie ends. This, I believe, is the true meaning of eternal life. Not that you as a particular person will live forever, but that what you truly are was never in time to begin with. It's the deathless reality that's present right now, as the simple fact of being aware. You know, I've often wondered if our entire conception of life and death might be a magnificent cosmic dream. And I don't mean that in some dismissive way, as if to say none of this matters. Quite the contrary. Dreams can be profoundly meaningful and transformative. Consider your nighttime dreams for a moment. When you're dreaming, the dream seems absolutely real, doesn't it? You don't go around in your dreams saying, oh, this is just a dream. No, you're fully immersed in it. 0. 5. The dream characters seem separate from you. The dream events seem to happen in time and space. There seems to be a past and a future. But when you wake up, what do you discover? That the entire dream, all its characters, events, locations, dramas, was happening within your consciousness. It wasn't out there at all. It was a play of consciousness appearing to itself. And most significantly, the dream character you identified with wasn't really you. It was just one appearance among many in the dream, all of which were equally you, or more accurately, equally manifestations of your consciousness. What if our waking reality is similar? What if this entire cosmos, with all its galaxies and planets and living beings, is something like a cosmic dream happening within consciousness itself? Not your personal consciousness or my personal consciousness, but consciousness with a capital C, the fundamental aware intelligence that underlies all existence. If that were the case, then death would be no more real than the death of a dream character when the dreamer awakens. The dream character doesn't go anywhere or experience anything when the dream ends. There's simply a shift in perspective, a recognition of a wider reality that was present all along. Now, I'm not saying this is definitely how things are. I'm offering it as a possibility, a way of looking at existence that might release us from our terror of non-existence. The ancient Hindus called this Maya not just illusion in the dismissive sense, but the creative power of consciousness to manifest as form, to dream itself into being as this vast and intricate cosmos. And they suggested that what we call death is simply consciousness withdrawing from one particular dream form and either remanifesting as another or recognizing its own nature as the dreamer of all forms. There's that wonderful Hindu concept of Turiya, the fourth state, beyond waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. It's pure awareness, the substrate of all experience, that which knows the other three states but is not contained by them. What if death is simply a transition into Turiya, a recognition of what we've always been? Or consider the Tibetan Buddhist practice of dream yoga. The practitioner learns to recognize their dreaming while still in the dream, what we now call lucid dreaming. But they don't just play around with dream superpowers. They use this recognition to understand the dreamlike nature of all phenomena, including waking life. The Tibetans also have their famous Bardo Thodo, often mistranslated as the Tibetan Book of the Dead. A more accurate translation would be liberation through hearing in the intermediate state. It suggests that after death, consciousness passes through various bardos or intermediate states. And the key teaching is that these states, no matter how terrifying or seductive they may appear, are ultimately projections of our own consciousness dreams, if you will. The liberated approach is to recognize the dreamlike nature of these experiences, neither grasping at the pleasant ones nor fleeing from the frightening ones. To recognize, in essence, this too is a dream. This too is a manifestation of consciousness. This too is not separate from what I am. So perhaps death is not an end, but an awakening, not from life, but from the dream of separation, the dream of being merely this limited human form, rather than the boundless awareness in which all forms arise and dissolve. And if that's the case, then there's nothing whatsoever to fear. For how can the dreamer be harmed by anything happening in the dream? I'd like to explore now a rather provocative idea. What if death, rather than being a catastrophe to be feared and avoided, is actually the ultimate release we've been seeking all along? You know, throughout our lives, we're constantly seeking relief from the sense of constriction, limitation, and separation that comes with identifying as a separate self. We seek it in pleasure, in achievement, in relationships, in spiritual practices. We want to feel more expanded, more connected, more at peace. And occasionally we get glimpses of it, don't we? In moments of great beauty or intimacy or creative flow, the boundaries of the separate self temporarily dissolve, and we taste a freedom and wholeness that feels like our birthright. We call these peak experiences, or mystical moments, or sometimes just being in the zone. What all these experiences have in common is a temporary suspension of the separate self-sense. The internal chatter quiets down. The constant self-referencing takes a break. And in that space, something greater than the individual self is revealed, a vast, peaceful awareness that feels like home. Now, what if death is the ultimate and final relaxation of this self-contraction? The complete letting go of the effort to be a separate someone? The final surrender of the part back into the whole? The Zen tradition speaks of the great death, not the physical death of the body, but the death of the illusion of being a separate self. This great death is considered the gateway to liberation. And it's something one can experience while still alive through meditation and insight. But perhaps physical death accomplishes the same thing automatically. Perhaps when the body dies, the contraction of being a separate self naturally releases, like a fist finally unclenching after being tightly closed for decades. And what's revealed is what was always there beneath the contraction, the boundless awareness that is our true nature. I'm reminded of the Zen master Shido Bunan, who said, "Die while alive and be completely dead. Then do whatever you want, and it's all good." What a fascinating teaching. He's suggesting that if we can experience the death of the separate self while still in the body, then we're free. Free from fear, free from grasping, free from the constant anxious effort to protect and promote this illusory entity we call me. And perhaps physical death is simply the completion of this process. Not something to be feared, but something to be welcomed as the final release from the cramped confines of separate selfhood. Think of how we feel when we finally put down a heavy burden we've been carrying for a long time. There's such relief, such lightness, such freedom. Death may be just such a putting down, the setting aside of the burden of being a separate someone who must constantly struggle to survive, achieve, and find meaning in a seemingly indifferent universe. Now, this doesn't mean we should rush toward death or devalue the precious gift of human life. Not at all. But it does suggest that we might relate to death very differently, not as a tragic end to be postponed at all costs, but as a natural completion, a return to wholeness, a homecoming. The Sufis have a beautiful phrase, "Die before you die." Like the Zen teaching, it points to the possibility of experiencing the liberation of death, the death of the separate self, while still embodied. And it suggests that those who have died in this way while still alive will face physical death with equanimity, even joy, because they already know what lies on the other side of the dissolution of separate selfhood. So perhaps death is not the opposite of life, but the completion of it. Not a failure, but a fulfillment. Not a loss, but a finding of what was lost. Not an end, but a return to the beginningless beginning. Not a descent into darkness, but an awakening into the light that we are. And so we come to our final contemplation. If everything I've been suggesting has any truth to it, if you will never experience your own death, if what you truly are is timeless awareness, if death is a transformation rather than an end, then how might we live differently? 0. 5. How might we approach this precious human life in light of these insights? Here's something truly paradoxical. Accepting the reality of physical impermanence doesn't diminish life, it intensifies it. It doesn't lead to nihilism or despair, it leads to a profound appreciation of each moment, each encounter, each experience. Think about it. If you knew you were eternal, truly knew it, not just as an intellectual concept but as a felt reality, how would you live? Would you continue to postpone joy, to hold back love, to limit your expression? Or would you dive fully into the stream of life, withholding nothing, meeting each moment with your whole being? You see, our fear of death doesn't protect us from death. It protects us from life. It keeps us small, cautious, hesitant. It has us living as if the purpose of life were merely to arrive safely at death. What a tragedy! The Zen tradition speaks of the great matter of life and death. This isn't just poetic language. It points to something profound. Our relationship with death shapes our relationship with life. If we're running from death, we're also running from life. If we're at peace with death, we can be fully present to life. The Buddha was once asked what his teaching was about. He replied, "I teach one thing and one thing only, suffering and the end of suffering. Our suffering around death, our terror of annihilation, our grief over loss comes from a fundamental misunderstanding of what we are. And the end of that suffering comes not from escaping death, but from seeing through the illusion of the separate self that fears death. So how do we live in light of this understanding? Let me suggest a few possibilities. First, we can practice dying before we die. Not in a morbid way, but in the sense of relaxing our grip on our separate identity. We can practice letting go of our self-image, our fixed ideas about who we are and what we need to be happy. We can practice surrendering to what is, rather than constantly trying to manipulate reality to fit our preferences. Second, we can live with an awareness of impermanence, not as a depressing fact, but as a precious reminder not to waste time. The Japanese have a term, mono no aware, which refers to the poignant beauty of impermanent things. The cherry blossoms aren't less beautiful because they fall, they're more beautiful. Their impermanence intensifies their beauty. The same is true of our lives. Third, we can drop the exhausting project of trying to build a permanent monument to ourselves, whether through achievement, possessions, or even spiritual attainment. Instead, we can ask, how can I serve? How can I express love? How can I leave the world a little more beautiful than I found it? These questions lead to a life that's rich and meaningful, regardless of its duration. Fourth, we can practice recognizing the timeless awareness that we are, not as an escape from life, but as the ground of living more authentically. We can learn to rest in awareness itself, rather than being constantly caught up in the content of awareness, all the thoughts, feelings, and sensations that come and go. And finally, we can meet each moment, each person, each experience with the recognition that this is it. This is life. Not some future moment when everything is perfect, but this very moment, with all its complexity and imperfection. This is where life is happening, and nowhere else. You know, there's a famous Zen saying, "Die every day." It doesn't mean to be morbid or depressed. It means to fully release each moment as it passes without clinging or resistance. To allow life to flow through you without damming it up with concepts and judgments. To die to the past and be born anew in the present, again and again and again. This is what I mean by living fully with death. Not denying it or pushing it away, but allowing the awareness of impermanence to strip away everything superficial and reveal what's most essential, most alive, most true. When we live this way, physical death becomes not an enemy to be feared, but a natural completion of a life well lived. Not a failure, but a fulfillment. Not a tragedy, but a transformation. And perhaps, just perhaps, as the Tibetans suggest, the moment of death offers a special opportunity, a heightened clarity, a dropping away of all that's secondary, a chance to recognize our true nature before the play of form begins again. If that's the case, then the more we practice recognizing our true nature now, while still embodied, the more prepared we'll be for that ultimate moment of truth. As we come to the end of our time together, I want to leave you with this. You are not a mortal being having an occasional spiritual experience. You are an eternal being having a temporary human experience. The fact that you're aware of being aware, that you can step back and notice your own consciousness, is the miracle of miracles. It's the universe becoming conscious of itself through you. And that consciousness, that awareness, is what you most fundamentally are. Everything else, your body, your thoughts, your feelings, your personality, your story, is content appearing within that awareness. It's all wonderful, all precious, all worth honoring and enjoying. But it's not what you are. It's what you're experiencing. And when the time comes for this particular experience to end, What you truly are will remain untouched, just as the sky remains when clouds form and dissolve, just as the ocean remains when waves rise and fall, just as consciousness remains when thoughts come and go. So don't worry about death. It's not your concern, because it can never touch what you truly are. Instead, give yourself fully to life. Be recklessly loving, outrageously generous, shamelessly joyful. Let your light shine so brightly that others forget their darkness in your presence. And remember, always remember, behind the play of light and shadow, beneath the dance of form, beyond the dream of separation, there is only this, the eternal now, the deathless awareness, the boundless love that is your true nature and the true nature of all that is. That's what you are. That's what I am. That's what everything is. And it can never be born and it can never die. It simply is. And in recognizing that, we are free.